interesting community because we all went to the same school. The kids all went to the same school. We walked to the same elementary school. And the elementary school was in a church. It was in the St. John Baptist Church. And so my first 4 years was at a school that was built by the church because the county, Coweta County, did not build schools for blacks in my years. They built schools for whites, but not for blacks. They had school buses for white kids and no school buses for blacks. They were taking my dad's tax money. They were taking he owned a little property. They were taking his property tax money. They were taking his income tax, sales tax, and all of that, and putting it into books and buses for white kids, but no books and buses for blacks. So by the time I was fourth grade, I think, or fifth grade, they finally, because they knew this, the Brown versus Board of Education was on the horizon. Several suits had been filed by then. And so they did something called a consolidation of these schools, these church schools, into one school, and then they gave us the old school bus. And so for the first time, I rode to school. But it was an interesting community for me growing up, and one that propelled me really out of high school and into Morehouse College and to the Civil Rights Movement.
Why did you decide to attend Morehouse?
Well, by the time I finished high school, actually by the time I was in the fourth or fifth grade, I realized that if I made good grades in school, teachers said nice things about me. The girls were all were nice to me, and I didn't have to go to the field to pick cotton because I was doing well in school. My father knew I was going to do something one day, and he didn't want me to. He said, "Look, as long as you make good grades and take care of yourself, you'll be fine." I work every day. I pay for the food. I pay for the house. I pay for whatever transportation you need. You just do well in school. You take care of the rest. He had nobody for college, so I had to get myself into college and pay my way through school. But it was something that was worth doing.
And when you went to college in 1959, had any of the events, the major events in the movement, the Montgomery bus boycott,
right,
the Little Rock crisis, was any of this inspirational to you?
Right, of course.
How did that weigh
well, let's start first. And when I was in the ninth grade, a girl named Jessie Smith brought a Jet magazine to school that had the picture of Emmett Till in there, the mentioning of Emmett Till. And Jessie was a pretty girl, and she had nice, pretty legs, and she was sitting over here on a bench, and she was crying. And when a pretty girl cries, everybody sort of pays attention. So I went over to see what was wrong with her, and she was looking at this photograph of Emmett Till. She was crying. It was the first time I'd ever seen it, and it was my first thought, and I'm sure it was hers too, that it could have been me, and I'm sure she was thinking it could have been my friend or somebody. And so that was my first thought, that something had to be done to change the horrible situation that all of us grew up in. Now, I was a black boy teenager coming up in Newnan, Georgia in the days of segregation, and learning how to act around white people was a survival skill. You had to. Your parents told you not to ever say anything back to them. If you're coming down the street, you see them coming on the sidewalk, you get off the sidewalk, and of course you never engage in any kind of argument with them and stuff like that. So you were taught a certain amount of fear because of the possibility of something happening to you. Now here I am looking at a Jet magazine with a photograph of somebody who had just been lynched, who was right about the same age as I was, a couple of years older than me, but about the same age. And so, it was my first awakening, I'm sure. I'm sure I vowed that day that if I ever got a chance to do something about it, I would. And that was 1956, I believe it is. 6 years later, I was in Mississippi with SNCC in 62.
Can you when you grew up in a small southern town in Georgia, did you interact much with white people, or were you segregated away? I think for a lot of people, when they hear segregation, they understand the rules, but were you literally growing up away from white people? Did you interact with them at all? What was it like for somebody?
Well, there was a certain amount of contact that let me say it this way. I was not shooting marbles with white kids every day. We weren't playing hopscotch and hanging out in bars and restaurants together. That was not the case. Didn't happen in my generation, not when I was coming up. But a certain amount of interaction with whites couldn't be avoided. If you went downtown to the movie had you bought your ticket at the same place, you went upstairs and whites went downstairs. So there was a certain amount of that. And of course, if you went into a department store to buy something or into a drugstore or something like that. So a certain amount of contact was unavoidable. But I never went to school with any of them for any of my years. When I was at Morehouse, I don't think there were any white students in my class. I had a couple of white professors at Morehouse. And my first interaction with whites were whites in the civil rights movement in Atlanta. First, at exchange students that were there at Morehouse and Spelman, and then in the civil rights movement in downtown Atlanta.
Okay.
People ask me, how did I ever get involved in this? Was I ever scared? And but if you were a young black kid growing up in rural Georgia, and I don't know whether this was true in Julian Bond's case or not. His case is a little bit different. But if you're a young black kid growing up in rural Georgia, learning how to act around white people was a survival skill. I mean, your parents put the fear of God in you, so because their way of trying to keep you alive. And so yes, I'd had numerous lessons from my mom and my dad about things that happened. I actually have a story about it. Once when I was, I think, in the 11th grade, I was driving. We never didn't own a car. My dad drove a truck all the time. And one of my buddies, I always had buddies who had cars. So one of my buddies, Eugene, had a car, and I borrowed his car periodically. And whenever I drove his car, I had to put some gasoline in it before I took it back to him. Otherwise, he wouldn't lend it to me anymore. So I was at the service station trying to put 3 gallons of gas in his car. On my way home, and the pump, you had to pay first. I come back to the pump, I'm pumping, and a group of white guys pull up to the pump behind me, and one of them gets out of the car and he says, "Hey, I need this pump." And I said, "Look, I'm about through. I got another few months, a little bit more. I'll be finished in a minute." And he said, "Do you do what I said? I told you I want this pump." So I said, "Hey, wait a minute. Well, I don't know what the hell he thought I was supposed to do. I guess I was supposed to stop." But I managed to finish, and he ranted and raved a little bit and went back and got in the car. I didn't know this at the time, but another black person overheard this interaction between the two of us. And I was about 2.5 miles from home. By the time I got home, somebody called my house and told my father that I had gotten into it with a white person. And that I was, so by the time I got home, he was up. He was sitting in the window with a gun, too, by the way, because there was no nonviolence in our household. So he had so when I got home, he was angry at me because he thought I had gone out there and brought danger on his whole family. Now, one of the advantages of the place where I lived was that this was a dirt road, and we lived at the end of the road. You had to turn around to get back out of there, so we weren't too worried about the night riders coming up in there. They would have had a problem getting out, and they would have to face my dad first. But first, he was mad at me, and when he first said something, I didn't even know what he was talking about. For me, it was such a little incident, and I didn't see anybody else around there, so I didn't know that some other black person who saw this apparently called him from a payphone and told him. And but yeah, you lived in this danger all the time because people thought they could do anything to you they wanted to. And like Rosa Parks on that bus, they told her to move. She didn't move. She ended up in jail. So I guess this guy thought I was supposed to stop pumping gas, leave the rest of my money on there so he could pump it into his car. But I wasn't going to do that. That night I was, besides I had my buddy's car, I had to take it back. And but you couldn't avoid a certain amount of it. But when you live that way, it's you get a chance to do something about it. It makes a difference, and I wanted to, and so let me just go secondly to something that happened to me at Morehouse. The first civil rights demonstration I went to in Atlanta, the first one I remember anyway. I was in a bunch of them, but the first one I remember, we went to the Southern Bell Telephone Company to apply for an entry level job. Now, Southern
what
Bell,
year was this?
This was 60. The spring, first year I was there. It was the spring of 1960, I believe it was.
Was this after the Greensboro sit-ins or before?
It was after the Greensboro sit-ins. Yeah. So we go to this place. I remember it was, I think, in Southwest Atlanta, someplace. We walk into this office, employment office, and we all well-dressed Morehouse men with our little string tie on and polished shoes and stuff. And so we walk in there to tell the lady we want to fill out an application for an entry-level job. And the lady says, "Well, we don't hire black people. You all know that already. So what are you talking about here?" And there was 8 of us. And so they eventually 8 more people show up, and because it was an organized demonstration, and after a while we had about 35 people in there, and we started singing freedom songs because so then she finally called the cops, and it's my first arrest. So I told the story over dinner to one of my 13-year-old grandchild, and she said, "Well, Granddad, it didn't do you any good to go to school if you couldn't get a job, or if the only job you could get was an entry-level job climbing a telephone pole, trying to figure out how you change these wires." Their parents were wasting their money and wasting their time. And I think this is really an important part. It's a teaching point for me because most of the people know the civil rights movement as us trying to integrate lunch counters or maybe trying to integrate schoolhouses. But the reality is that what made the movement powerful and made it go well with the public was the fact that we always thought that the economics of this was important, and that going those of us who were going to college one day wanted to practice our trade in a place where we could earn money like everybody else and use that money to support our families. And we knew that if we didn't change society, it wasn't going to change by itself. And if we could change it during our lifetime, it'd make life better for us and for our kids and our grandchildren. So I think that's important for people to understand. And we picked targets like that because we knew they were important symbolically. And although we weren't ourselves necessarily interested in an entry-level job at the telephone company, we knew that there were hundreds of other black people out there who were looking for jobs and who wouldn't be employed just because of the color of their skin.
Okay. Let's talk, if you wouldn't mind, let's talk about the formation of the Atlanta student movement. Let's talk about that day when Lonnie shows the newspaper to Julian and says, "Have you seen this?" And do you want to take it from there and tell us what happened?
Well, now I wasn't with Julian and Lonnie at that time. They started. By the time I found them, they had organized a group of students at Morehouse College, and and other people working in these other campuses. My roommate and I had he had the room key. I had to go find him and get the room key to get back to the room, and he was at the meeting. So that's like the first time I ever went to one of the meetings, and I got there and I stayed. I was in the back too because I had to wait till the meeting was over, and so I got to hear a lot of the presentation and. So they did. Lonnie was always a very good organizer. So he's going around asking people what they thought. And when they finally get to me, I'm in the back. I don't know much about that. I said, "Look, this is the most disorganized thing I ever saw." He said, "Well, you're in charge of operations then. You get this thing organized, get these people downtown." I had no idea what he was talking about. But it was a group of young students who were trying to figure out how to do this. Nobody had ever done it before. And it took, but hey, we were the best and brightest of our generation. So if we couldn't do it, nobody else could. And so we figured it out.
And was it at this time when you met Julian? Can we talk a little bit about how you met Julian and how all that began?
Well, the one overarching thing that I always remember about Julian was he was probably the first middle class black person I ever met. There was no middle class black community in Newnan, Georgia. We were all poor, or we were all just a little bit above poverty, and there was no real middle class black person. I mean, Julian read a bunch of books. His father was a professor. They lived off in Africa. I mean, he was the first person I ever met who was actually an intellectual who had read all these books and had traveled and stuff. So my sort of introduction to him, and at the time his father and his mother, I think both and his sister, they were all living together on Morehouse. Either Morehouse College campus or AU, one of those. They were living on the college campus in one of the college campus housing. So we got to see them a lot. We met a lot at their house and got to meet them, his father, and got to know them well. And that was, as I said, my first memory was of that. And he sort of kept that profile through the movement too. He was always a more intellectual and more thinker, and trying to figure out how to fashion the message in a way that it made sense to everybody. But he was radical, way more radical than Lonnie King. But he
how so?
Well, I think he was. I think he had a better sense of how you make society change, how you get these people's attention, and how you make them do things. Lonnie was like me. We were always looking for a fight and another target to go after, and he was just. But Julian was not like that. Yeah. So I mean, Lonnie. I think I was probably more like Lonnie. That's one of the reasons why I succeeded him as chairman of the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement. We were always looking for another fight, for another target to go after. And Julian was always thinking, how do we get this, take advantage of what we have here now before we go on to the next target. We learn from this that we can take to the next target and maybe try to get more out of these people along our way. It was good to have him there. And of course, he was always communicating through the newspapers. He had found a way to get involved. He was a great writer, so he found a way to get himself involved in the newspapers.
One of the things that Lonnie mentioned to me when I interviewed him last July was that the different student movements that were coming out of the South, whether in Atlanta or Nashville or wherever it might be, they all reflected the people who were part of it, that
Right.
the student movement of Atlanta was different from Nashville. He mentioned to me that in Nashville they wanted to love everyone to death, and in Atlanta they wanted to nickel and dime everyone to death. Do you think that student movements, and Cam, this is something I think you'll find interesting as a young activist himself, do you think that a student movement takes on the personalities of those who lead it and those who decide to get involved?
Yeah, and I actually, let me just say, I had an experience different than both Lonnie and Julian, because I eventually ended up going to Mississippi as a full-time organizer, one of 15 or 16 people to go into Mississippi, into deep South county, Black Belt County, and I sat down in Atlanta with the leaders of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, as we picked and chose counties that we were all going to go into and try to organize. So I had the experience of organizing in a city, probably the biggest city in the South, fighting the largest department store in the Southeast, Bridges, and then going to a very rural area after that, where you try to register voters one by one by one. So I experienced it both. The Atlanta movement was a very, very interesting, because at a point we had, I'm sure, more than 3/4 of the black population involved in this. And I tell young people this about nonviolence, so young people get impatient with nonviolence. Nonviolence has one very unique and overarching advantage, and that is that if you have a nonviolent demonstration, really everybody can participate in this demonstration. You could be in a wheelchair, you could be deaf, everybody can participate. If I were trying, I'm at the African American Civil War Memorial today. If I tried to put together a crack group of military guys to go out on a mission, probably 2 people in my whole organization will qualify, maybe 1, and I might not be one of those because everybody can't do it. You don't have the physical stamina. You probably can't carry a weapon. You probably can't fire it accurately enough. You're always going to get left behind. But with a nonviolent demonstration, everybody can participate. And once you add a boycott to this thing of the downtown businesses now, all you got to do is stay home. And if you're scared, if you're too cowardly to go walk on a picket line, you can also stay home and call people. You start with your own family. You tell people this all the time. Start with your own family. Tell your family not to go out there. Tell your cousins not to go out. Tell people at your church not to go shop. So you can organize the whole community, because when this thing does finally happen, everybody's going to benefit from it. We're all going to get to go to be treated with dignity in these various places, and we're also going to be able to get jobs in these places where blacks who are currently either unemployed altogether or they're underemployed because they're stuck in low-paying positions that they're overly qualified for, but they can't move up because of the color of their skin. And so that makes it a very powerful movement. And I think that for young people, especially young people who get impatient with nonviolence and think they want to go to violence, nonviolence has a great advantage, because you can involve everybody in this. You can make it a very large movement, and also, you can also bring shame and to people who do things to you because you're not doing anything to them. And that's but I think it's powerful, and it's something that young people, I think, today ought to think about because violence, this killing and stuff is not going to get it done. We're 10% of the population, 20% of the population. You're never going to overpower 80% who are better armed probably than we are, and then control all the other aspects of society, the jails and the juries and all that stuff. So you got to be smart about what you do, but you got to get people behind you, and then you got to make it happen. It's kicked off, and people started demonstrating in these various college communities all around the country. It wasn't long before Atlanta had to take its place too. We would like to think that we were leaders of that, but we really weren't. Many other schools had started this before we finally got Atlanta all revved up, and but at that point, some smarter people among us, including Ella Baker and others, decided that maybe we should meet to talk about what we were doing to coordinate our campaign. Eventually we met with Dr. Martin Luther King. That's what we were in Raleigh to do there at Shaw University, to meet with Dr. King. We were going to become a junior organization to his a junior SCLC. That was his idea, I guess, and hers too in the beginning. But we got there and spent listening to Dr. King talk for about 4 hours about what he was doing and his people, and we didn't get to say a word. So after a while, we finally asked if we could be recessed. We want to talk to each other, see what we're going to do. We left the room and never came back. So when I formed our own organization, because Dr. King was about 10 years older than we were at the time. And actually wasn't even 10 years older than Lonnie, because you remember Lonnie King was 6 years old. He'd been to the Navy and back, so he was older than we were. So he and Dr. King were closer to age than we were. But for us, that seemed like a pretty old person. And we just thought, well, you know what, this is not going to work. We're the ones that's going to be out there every day, walking the streets, going to jail, picketing and stuff. We should be the ones to decide what we're going to do, what our targets are, and when we're going to do these things. We shouldn't have to report to some organization of people just because they're older than we are to tell us which way to do this thing. And so we formed our own organization.
And so after the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee forms and then you're back at school, how did you all in the Atlanta student movement pick your targets? How did that work? And how did you decide to kind of end with Riches in the fall of 1960?
Well, let me say one other thing about SNCC, which most people have forgotten about. So we leave Raleigh, and we decide we're going to have this organization. So it's going to be headquartered in Atlanta, because Atlanta is sort of the center of. So why do they want to put it in Atlanta? Because we got probably the most middle class organization in the country. We had people who had money who were part of the movement there in Atlanta. And Lonnie and Julian, I think, deserve some credit for this, because I remember this lady named Mrs. P.Q. Yancey. Her husband was a medical doctor. He owned a hospital in Atlanta. He was doing quite well. She had an account at Riches, one of those accounts we were talking about. Every 2 or 3 years they bought a mixed stove there at Riches, but she was not allowed to try this thing on in the store. And she had not thought about this until we started talking to her about it. She said, you know what, they treat you. And Mrs. Yankee was a tall, stately-looking lady anyway, and very attractive, light-skinned woman. And she was very dignified. And so we said, okay, if I'll tell you what you do. The next time you go in there, you try on one of those things. And so she went in there one day and tried part of the demonstration, and they told her she couldn't try this thing. And she said, well, look, I've been buying these things here for years, and we don't care about that. So she said, I'm never going to buy another one. So she tore her card up. She started a movement among middle-class people. And they became supporters of the civil rights movement, because it wasn't just a group of students out there who were doing something that sort of rabble-rousers making a noise. We were talking about real issues here. We were talking about people being treated with dignity or not in these places, and we were talking about whether people could work in jobs. We knew that there were people working in the department store there, for example, who did all the displays for the windows. The person who does a window display has a title. It's a professional title. There was a white person that had a title of doing this. She was being paid the money. There were 3 or 4 black women who were doing this, who were part of the maintenance staff, who were the ones who were actually building these exhibits in these windows. And they were just not being paid for what they were doing because they were black, and they were being kept in this second-class citizenship, even in their employment. They were working full day's work, getting partly paid for what they were doing. So this problem affected everybody. We also knew that if we could break Rich's department store, we could probably break the rest of the South. But that also enabled us to have more money in our bank account than most people, and we could get out of jail if we wanted to, because people bailed us out. And so the first SNCC office was in Atlanta, Georgia, over on Auburn Avenue, and the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement. We paid the rent on the office. That's because we were the only group that had any money. None of the others had any money, and we had enough money so we could pay rent for. They had a guy named Ed, I think Ed King, who was not related to Martin Luther King, a little short guy named Ed. I remember because I used to go there and pay the rent every now and then because they didn't have enough money to pay the rent. Had one little office there with a bunch of books in it, and 2 or 3 telephones, and it didn't cost that much. But hey, so I tell SNCC all the time, they don't remember that we paid the rent for that organization for the first several years because they didn't have any money to pay the rent for a SNCC office, which ultimately ended up in Atlanta and much better off later on. But in the beginning, we kept it alive.
How'd you get over to Raymond Street?
Well, I think this is the office in Atlanta eventually develops into a larger office, and we started to raise money around some big projects, and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Once we got that organization started over there in Mississippi, we engaged a lot of young white people who were our auxiliaries on these white college campuses. Many of them started to send money from their college. This is still true today. These student organizations on these campuses have student funds. In some cases, they're very sizable amounts of money, and they can support organizations if they want to. They actually supported us as we went back and forth to the college campuses, paid our travel and stuff like that. And some of them made annual donations to our organization, so we were able to do a lot better.
Dr. Smith, how did you and your colleagues in SNCC go about organizing and communicating and creating consensus to do the different projects that you guys were able to do and demonstrations that you guys were able to do while in SNCC
Okay,
during
well,
COVID?
well, first of all, let me say that the sit-in movement had a particular advantage and a particular technique. We knew, for example, and we would tell the press before we were going to go to a department store today to sit in at a lunch counter. We didn't just go out there on our own. We would call the newspapers and tell them we're going to be there at 3:00 to sit in at the lunch counter, so the newspaper will get there, and so that whatever happened to us didn't just happen to us in isolation. It could be shown on the local news and around the country. And as I said before, we were all local people. We were local to at least Atlanta, in some cases like London and Julian Bond. I was local to Newnan, Georgia, which was just 30 miles south. And my people in Newnan got the same newspapers that they got in Atlanta, and they got the same radio stations. And so you use the press as a way to sort of get your message out there. And then the other part of it is informal. The black community has always had its own informal method of communication, which has been is always fascinating for me to talk about, because people have all kind of ways of getting the word out. And these people, we joke about the barber shops and the beauty shops and the shoe shine parlors and the taxi cab drivers and all these people, man, they talk all the time and they carry the news from one place to the next. And so once they become, and they're all sympathetic to your cause, because they know whatever you might do, if you go sit at a lunch counter in a place where you're trying to buy a cup of coffee, no hoodlum should have a right to stand to beat you for as long while the cops are standing there watching you get beaten, and then the cops are going to arrest you. They're not going to arrest the people who beat you. They're going to let them go. They're going to let you. And then well, if you had to been there with your head in the way, they wouldn't hit you with that cup of coffee or with that billy stick or something. So the whole logic of policing and of protection goes just upside down. And the public really gets more and more sympathetic towards you. And then one other thing about this, which I'll say about Atlanta and the picket line, we figured out after a while that if we put a picket line around Richard's department store, we didn't just stop African Americans from shopping in there. Most people will not cross a picket line, because all kind of word gets spread out there. Some people said, well, if you go down there, they snatch your bags out of your hand because you're not in there. Or those picket signs had sticks on them. They use the sticks to fight with them, all kind of stuff. So the talk that gets out in the community can be totally different than what's going on actually down there. But it all contributes to your cause, because there's no casual Sunday afternoon shopping anymore. I know no ladies who are riding around decided, well, let's go down to Richards and see what they got in there. Well, yeah, but they have a picket line around that place. These people down there singing these songs with these sticks, and I don't want to be bothered with that. So why am I going down there? So you have a direct impact on people who think who identify with us because they know we're being mistreated because of the color of our skin. But you have an indirect impact among other people, well-meaning other people too, who say, well, maybe they should let these people have a cup of coffee. What's wrong with that? If they shop there, they take their money. Why shouldn't they be able to try on clothes in the store? So well-meaning, reasonable-minded people are starting to identify with you, and just by their actions, they're helping you. Their inaction, they're not shopping there, helps you a lot. And then finally, one year we organized, this is what made Atlanta famous from my view, and different than many other cities. For Christmas one year, we figured out that the department stores really make their money 2 or 3 times a year: Christmas, Easter, and summer, before school starts back. So, and that sort of coincides with a student college activity. You're out of school for Christmas, you're out for Easter, and you're out for the summer. So in those times, we could mount a much greater picket line and a much more effective boycott in those periods of time, and not interfere with our schools. So we're trying to remain good students and also good citizens at the same time, but on a schedule that coincides. And for Christmas one year, we organized one of those campaigns to tell people, don't shop, to give old gifts for Christmas. Don't buy anything for Christmas. Recycle old presents. And we had little workshops to show you how to recycle dolls and recycle bicycles and things like that, to get people not to shop. And Lonnie told me that they saw something that Richard said they lost like $8 million one of those years when we didn't. And the man that Richard was talking about dying and going to hell broke rather than integrate his place. So that became the battle cry for us. Well, I guess we better go down here and start this picket line up, because we can send send this man to hell broke before we for this campaign. And we had the most effective campaign in the country. I think we had the most organized for that year, the most organized campaign in the country. And I think that's, I mean, I'll say that to Nashville and all these other cities. We put a number on that town for that year, and I think that's one of the reasons why they caved in. So this notion that they just one day changed their minds, decided it wasn't right, they want to do something. Yeah, right. That might have been some of it, but most of it was the fact they were losing money because we had organized an effective campaign there to try to right a wrong, historical wrong that should have not have had to go this far in the first place. Atlanta is the leader of the South. It has more money than any other city in the South. It has the better colleges and universities, black and white. I happen to have gone to one of those good universities there, Morehouse College, so I know it's a good school. There's no coincidence that Martin Luther King, who was the leader of our times, graduated from Morehouse. So we had it should have been a leader, and it was not performing its duty as the leader of the South, and it had the good newspaper there. It has not really, in my view, ever lived up to to its role, and it should do a better job of this. And I've been working with them recently on the cyclorama, repurposing the cyclorama, so we can try to get them out of some of that funk that they've been in all these many years about the Civil War. So it's a good time, and there's always work to do. But I think that the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement at one time was the most organized one in the country and the most effective.
Was there a sense of rivalry with Atlanta, Nashville, other places? Talk about that a little bit.
Oh yeah, well,
friendly rivalry or angry rivalry?
No, it was friendly. I mean, we all knew each other. We all knew we were doing something, and I think we knew. I think by the time we got to 63 and 64, we knew that we were doing something significant in the country and that it was going to be permanent change that we're looking at here. And we knew that we were personally involved in it. We knew each other. It was probably a couple hundred of us all together. If you added the activists in all of the big cities combined, there's probably 200 or 300 of us. By the time we're in year 2 and 3 and 4, we all knew each other. At least we knew each other's reputation. We've been in meetings together. And I remember, two things. One, a guy named Charles Sherrod, who was in Albany, Georgia, saying that what we had was our bodies and we cared about each other. And then one of us went down. We pledged to take our bodies and put it in the place where the other person rested. And I think this is something that this actually became one of the real organizing points for SNCC in the long run, because the purpose of violence is to try to scare people away. And if what you're getting by locking people up is more and more people coming to fill up your jailhouse, then maybe you're locking people up is counterproductive. It's certainly working for us because we're getting more and more people in jail, more and more people involved. We're getting more and more national attention, and whatever boycott we're putting on or whatever it is becoming more and more effective. So it's certainly working for us. But it's sort of a reverse psychology because the whole purpose of violence is always to scare people to the point where they will cower down and give up whatever goals they had and whatever ambitions they had in the face of danger. What SNCC did was to reverse that, and we did talk openly about this, and then we knew that we were putting ourselves in danger. We knew that in some of these cases, particularly by the time I got to Mississippi, that the states had these lists of names of people that they were after. They had our tag numbers for all of our cars. They knew where we all lived. They tracked us through the State Highway Patrol and all these various other outfits that they put together. And so we were aware of that. But we also were aware that people were supporting us big time. And actually, I'll tell you a quick story about this, just for your purposes, young man. I just found this out a few weeks ago. When Dr. King got killed, I was in Mississippi. I'd seen him the day before at the airport in Memphis. Just a chance passing at the airport. I didn't even know if he knew who I was because I hadn't seen him in a long time. He won the Pupil's Prize since the last time I saw him. He was very famous, but he called me across the lobby to say he wanted SNCC to come to Memphis to organize the young people, the young Panthers that he said were throwing rocks at the cops and didn't believe in nonviolence. And I told him I had moved to Washington, D.C., and I didn't do that anymore. I said, I can't. I'm home, my marching shoes. And he said, "Young man, you don't ever hang up your marching shoes." And they walked away. And then the next day he was shot. But I was talking to a lady last week who was teaching school in a little town called Marks, Mississippi at the time, and she said the next day her kids at school, elementary school too, decided that they were going to go. They were going to march downtown in this little town. And so she said she turned to her fellow teacher and said to him, if we let these kids march downtown without the assistance of their teachers, we will never be able to control them again. They won't never have any more respect for us. So we have to go with them. We can't let them go by themselves. And so she tells the principal, we're going to go with our kids. So the principal says, you can't do that because the superintendent told us, we need to lock this building down. Can't let these kids go. And she said, the kids are going anyway. We're going with the kids. So they went out. So the teachers all marched out of the building with the kids. And so the superintendent said, well, tell them that if they walk out, they can keep on walking because they will never teach again in this county. And so they targeted these people, and the next day they announced they were going to fire all of them. She said all of the teachers in this county went out. Said, if you're going to fire them, you got to fire all of us. So now you've got what started out as a demonstration with a bunch of kids. Their teachers just started to. Now you got the whole damn county of teachers saying there won't be no more school until you all bring those people back on the staff so they can work in this building. Now, and I like to tell that story because people don't understand how powerful this movement was. We in some of these places we had what people might call a revolution. We had virtually the whole community involved. Once you get kids marching, their parents are going to be out there. These are elementary school kids. Their parents are going to come see about them. And their church members, their preacher. If the preacher doesn't go see about them, he ain't going to have no church. So what good is it to go up there Sunday taking your money to him? When you get in trouble, he won't come and see about you. So I think people really underestimated big time the amount of suffering that African American community endured for all those years, and how much courage these people had, and how much they were willing themselves to defy authority to try to change it in such a way that it made a difference. And it went all up and down the line, from little kids to adults to preaching communities and other places like that. And that's how we changed the South. If we had not been able to do that, we never would have been able to accomplish what we did in the few years of the only comparable period for this was the Civil War, the 4 years of the Civil War, where you eventually get these guys in the Union Army with these uniforms on, and then they passed those 3 amendments. But and there is a comparison here where African Americans pass through the crucible of the Civil War, and then they get out and they get these 3 amendments, and they get out to change society. By the time we get to 1890, there's 100 black colleges in the country. The 1960s civil rights movement is based in those black colleges that were created at the end of the Civil War. And those black colleges are all the ones that are leading these movements. So the best and the brightest of our people who've been exposed to education, who have some sense that something good can happen with them, and they also have a sense that it's their responsibility to make it happen, that they have to make it happen themselves. And then you get those people pass through the crucible of the civil rights movement, take over these big cities like Atlanta and Washington, D.C., and change those cities. So you see a big growth in the African American community and income and college education. Things like that happened between 1950 and 2008 when Obama ran. So it made a big difference to us here in the country, and I think we're just now realizing what the total impact of it was.
How important was the news media in helping you do what you needed to do, and was there a difference between how you worked with the black press compared to the white press?
Well, black press was always with us because they identified with us. They got treated as badly as we did. We showed this movie downstairs about the video about Emmett Till, and the black newspaper reporters say that the sheriff who's running the courtroom there in Emmett Till's trial says there are only 30 seats in here, and we got 4 reserved for the black press, so you all got to sit right there. The rest of y'all got to be outside. So it was all they got treated as bad as we did. And the advantage was that if we could disappear into society, they could disappear too. But yeah, it became so important that these mobs would attack the press first, because if you had a camera out there and they knew there was going to be a camera scene with them attacking somebody at a lunch counter or somebody making a video or photograph, they attacked them first to try to get those away out of the way so they could before they did their damage, before they did their dirt. So yeah, the press was always in danger, but hey, man, as we've seen, with these war stories, there are some courageous people out here with the press who really want to take. Their view is this story has to be told, and they have to put themselves in some danger to tell it. They were willing to do it, so it made a difference, and we would have won in the long run anyway because our cause was just, and we had the people behind us. But having the press spread this story nationwide and worldwide made a big difference to us because. I was reading something the other day about the end of World War II, and where John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State, says that the Russians are beating us in this world game because the Russians are telling people that America is not exporting democracy. America is exporting white supremacy. So all you got to do is look at the way they're treating black people here in the United States. That's how they treat black people all over the world. That's their job. They're not trying to make the world safe for democracy. They're trying to make the world safe for white supremacy. And he said basically this thing is killing us. America can't have a good foreign policy as long as it's. And of course that's about the time that the president actually issues an executive order desegregating the military as a first step because it's the military that's the outpost out there in the world that's representing the United States. Who's carrying the flag and who's out there, in these outposts and places talking about democracy, it's the military. So the president desegregates the military partly as a result of that pressure that they were getting from foreign sources who now know these stories because these stories are being reported by the press. And the civil rights movement, the press was much more prevalent then. These news organizations had developed much more sophisticated procedures and methods and means, and they had more courageous reporters. So we were able to get the story out primarily because of the press.
Was it hard to get the white media, whether it was the Atlanta Constitution, Atlanta Journal in Atlanta, or even later on, to come in and pay attention?
Well, when you think about it now, these local newspapers are in the pockets of the they're in the pockets of the local merchants. Who pays for the advertising in the paper? Whose ads are in there? I'm sure Richards was the biggest ads purchaser that the Atlanta Constitution had, and so they weren't going to say anything that was let's put it. They were going to make every story they wrote as sympathetic to Richards as they could make it. It was hard. It's hard to deny the fact that these people are in jail, and that they're in jail because they try to get a job there, or they tried to get. It's hard to deny that fact, but they did try to say, well, these are all outside agitators. This is the people in Atlanta are all right. They know better. It's these outside people that are coming in here. These students that are coming from all over the country, and they get over here and they get started this stuff, and stuff they wouldn't do at home, they do it here. It was a bunch of crap. Of course, the leadership of the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement was in people from Atlanta. And I become. When I succeeded learning, I came from Newnan, 30 miles south of Atlanta. So you might say I was an outsider. Yeah, I rode in there on a bus, but not that much of an outsider. And so they were deluding themselves about that. And we face this now. I was in Atlanta recently, and I was at the Atlanta History Center. They had a bunch of teachers over there talking about the cyclorama. And they told me that the State Board of Regents has issued something saying that the causes of the Civil War were this order: was secession, states' rights, tariffs, and slavery. And slavery could be no higher than the fourth of these things. So you say, okay, but teachers can teach these things and say all of these things were about slavery. The states' rights was about the right to own slaves, whatever. Yeah, but if you're taking a test, the State Board of Regents says there's only one answer to this question. What's the answer? The answer is states' rights. So if any other answer is incorrect. So you can put slavery there if you want at the risk of your own peril. So how do you get around the fact that the states are still passing these laws saying they're going to protect these monuments that are built toward slavery and hatred? And even the state policymakers are still today saying that there ought to be the slavery has to be so far down. We all know that when Georgia voted to leave the Union, they said they were leaving the Union over the issue of slavery. We know that. You can read the secessionist papers. I've read them myself. They're on my website. So in the face of all this evidence, why are they still saying this? Well, they're still saying it because it suits their purpose, and their purpose is to show themselves as somebody who was blooded but not bowed, whose cause was just, and that cause was just because that cause was about secession and about something else, and slavery was just a minor part of it. They don't want to give. The fact of the matter is, when Sherman's army invaded the state of Georgia, Georgia had 1 million residents. 430,000 of them were enslaved. 43.7% of the whole state was enslaved. So for them, Sherman's army looked like a liberation movement. You know, but their opinion doesn't matter. Why should their opinion matter? They were only 47, and besides, they were enslaved. They weren't enslaved by the time Sherman's army left Georgia, but they weren't enslaved anymore. They were now free people, and they were talking about 40 acres and a mule and the right to vote. So the world changed right under their footsteps, but they still haven't changed all these landmarks and all these various textbooks and stuff like that. But the young people of America, they may, and let me just say this to you. When I asked about this, about why it was taking so long to change these things in Georgia, what they said was, well, you know, we got a library full of textbooks with this lost cause message in it. We all the movies and all the videos, all this lost cause. But I was in a library in Americus, Georgia. I went to speak in Andersonville. They invited me to Americus to talk at the library. You know, they paid me $100 to speak, and they worked me like a government mule. So I had to speak at 3 high schools, none of which had any air conditioning. And one of them was in Americus, Georgia. And
this is recent?
Yeah, it was 2 years ago.
No air conditioning.
Yeah. No,
in these high schools.
That's right. Well, they don't have any air conditioning high schools here. Most of them don't in D.C. But which is why we let school out in the summer, in the spring too. When I went into the library, I used to see the library because I was there. So I go in the library. They don't even call it a library anymore. They call it a media center. So I go into the media center, and there are about 50 books in there. I got more books on this case here, about half as many books as they had in the whole library. So I said, what happened to the books? They said, our kids have access to 4 million books on the internet. So they all have these portals where they hook up their computers and this. So maybe they'll be able to leapfrog all these old books that have this lost cause misinformation in it and all those things they got archived in these libraries that they don't want to get rid of because there's so many of them and they hold them so dear. So maybe this next generation of blacks and whites will be able to leapfrog all that misinformation and go out there and find the real truth, and they'll be able to live a better life in a better world. You heard it from me, buddy.
I sure did.
Hope springs eternal.
Okay. So how'd you end up in Mississippi?
Okay, so now we had a high water mark in Atlanta with the Rich's department store breakthrough, which I'm sure Lonnie talked about.
And that's the fall of 1960.
That's right. That's the fall of 1960. He's getting. We've really brought Rich's to his knees. I picketed that place so long I could walk around the block without even with my eyes closed. You know, you count 160 paces that way and turn right and go that way and go. And this is a handful of us: Frank Holloway and myself and Willie Paul Berrien and a guy named what was his name? And Ruby Doris Smith and her sister, and about 20 of us who was there almost every day. So we had to keep picking line up all the time around the place. So. But then we finally got this breakthrough, which really was not really much of a deal. It was more symbolic than anything else, because by then, Rich's, all these places that we were putting these boycotts on them, but as they were losing business, they were also laying people off. And the last hired, first fired. If they don't need you to wash dishes and whatever, they're gonna lay you off because they don't have any business coming up in there. Some of them just doing it out of spite. And Richards also was laying people off. That's why, because they were losing money and they were laying off people. And so by the time we got around to making the deal, there were a lot of people out there out of work who had just who were just laid off from their jobs. So any agreement that we made to hire new people, those people laid off really didn't count because they had jobs before. So the agreement really did not net much of a gain, except in the higher, token people in the higher echelon jobs. And so the public was pretty angry about this, and I was quite honestly, I was angry about it too. And by then, Lonnie was on his way off to law school, so I sort of inherited this mess that he had left behind back here in Atlanta, and I wasn't very happy with it. But In the meantime, we had come to the attention of I had, at least because I was chairman of the Committee on Appeal of Human Rights. And Bob Moses got out of jail over there in Macomb, Mississippi. Came through there, I think, in the spring of '60, with a patch on his head, and told me that they had just locked him up in Mississippi, and we used the royal we have to go over there and try to do something to show that we're not going to run out just because they do hurt somebody local. And basically what he was saying was we can't stir these people up and then leave them behind. And I said, well, Bob, you know what? I've got my hands full here in Atlanta. I just got, but y'all got middle class movement over here. You need to go to Mississippi and see what the civil rights movement is all about. And I told him I'd come over for the summer. So I went over for the summer of '60. And, which I did do, stayed over there for the summer. And then I came back in the fall. And some guy got killed in Durant, Mississippi that they said we had worked with over there they just killed him and dismembered his body. And so I agreed to go back in the spring of '61, and that's when I left college at the end of '61 to go back to Mississippi, and I stayed there for 6 years. Stayed along with anybody. So I was in any of the SNCC staff that was assigned to Mississippi. Got married while I was over there, and wife and I actually spent a year living in tents with a bunch of sharecroppers who'd been evicted from a plantation, and then we finally got them a place to stay and got that straightened out. And then I moved to Washington.
Where in Mississippi did you go?
My first assignment was in Marshall County, Mississippi, which is where I met. I met Larry Rubin here in Washington D.C., but we ended up being assigned to the same place in the civil rights movement. But Marshall County, which is just south of Marshall County, abuts the Shelby County, which is where Memphis is, and so it's the little town is probably 40, 50 miles south of Memphis. But it was a county that was 76% black. And it was 76% black when I went over there in '61. So you could imagine during the time of the Civil War, it was probably 90% black. And following the war, it had been an African-American sheriff, and we knew this in the county. The mayor's little town had been African-American. Now, I had not heard anything about African-American soldiers fighting in the Civil War before I went over to Mississippi. I learned that while I was there. And I met a man who was a descendant, which got me interested in the story. And the fact that it was so well suppressed made it even more interesting to me, because it just basically means that African Americans got no credit for their role in determining the outcome of the Civil War and for the passage of those three amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which changed the country, really, basically. Got rid of slavery, set America on a new path to citizenship and freedom and voting. But they got no credit for it. And so it was a great story for me. I got interested in it on a side issue, and then eventually in Washington, D.C., I get a chance to build a monument for them. So you might say it all started somewhere in the Mississippi Delta, but it ended here in Washington, D.C. And so that's where I went first. And then in the spring of '61, I believe it was, maybe '62, in the spring of '62, Jimmy Travis it wasn't even spring, it was February, I believe, in 1962. Jimmy Travis was gunned down along with 2 or 3 other SNCC people in Greenwood, Mississippi. And as I said earlier, SNCC policy was if you gun down one of our people, somebody else got to go take their place. So this shooting took place, I think it was in the morning, around 10, 11 o'clock. About 1 o'clock, they called me up in Holly Springs and told me everybody had to come to Greenwood because they just gunned down one of our people with machine guns. Shot him with an automatic weapon, too. Shot up a car.
And what was the explanation given?
Well, we had to go. We could not leave the local people there just because these people somebody resorted to this kind of violence. So we went down and started really organizing in the Florida County, which is where the shooting took place in Greenwood. And it was rough there. This was probably the worst year of my life in the civil rights movement. Up to then, I had been in Atlanta where there were no bombings and no shootings and stuff like that. I've been in Holly Springs where I was by myself, but I actually had a good organization. And I was a target. I knew that because the sheriff sent people to talk to me all the time and arrested me 2 or 3 times. But
talk to you about what?
About the fact that we were stirring up trouble and we were going to get ourselves killed. The sheriff never said, "I'm going to kill you." He said, "You're going to get yourself killed." And And some guy, black guy, told me that he had been that they offered him money to kill me in Holly Springs. That he was gonna. I said, well, obviously you're not gonna kill me because you're telling me all of this. He said, well, I might. I said, well, not tonight. so, but yeah, but Greenwood was the first time I faced really abject violence. It was they bombed our cars, they shot up the office, they dragged some little girl behind a car. And I was in Greenwood when Medgar Evers was killed. He was assassinated in Jackson, and then it was the summer of '63. It was pretty bad, and of course later on that year the church gets bombed in Birmingham with the girls in it, and we all go over there to this funeral, and then Kennedy gets killed. So it's just a array of just all of this violence that actually led SNCC, by the way, to decide that we were going to do the summer project. That's how we came to the idea of doing the summer of '64. And I remember because the Mississippi staff voted this down the first time it came up, and then
Why?
well, because we were already targets, and we knew if you brought a bunch of people down there, including white people, and there were going to be a lot of women in this group, have black men and white women together. It's like waving a red flag in front of a bullfight, man. And so that was one of the reasons. The other one was that I think we were just beginning to get our feet on the ground as an organization where people in the community trusted us, they believed in us, they turned to us if they had problems, and we also figured if we brought white people in, more white people bring in, black person walk in the room, they all just gravitate toward the white person because that's who they think is supposed to be leading this organization. But the fact of the matter was that these people all reported to us, which will turn out to be an interesting phenomenon. But on the other hand, the prevailing argument which Bob made, which turned out to be correct, he just turned back and said, look at all these people who've been killed already. So Mississippi got a list of all of us, all of our names on the list. They working our way down the list. He said, we won't survive another year in Mississippi, the way these people are killing us all. And so we got to open this up. Got to bring the press in, bring in these outside people, all these students from these campuses have campus newspapers. They all had parents who cared about them. They had all by the end had learned how to do press releases that talked about what we were doing in Mississippi. So they were like the second guard. They were, and we were all assigned to them. I was when I got out of jail in Greenwood in June of '63. I went up to Carleton College in Minnesota because that was my school. So I went up there to speak to kids on the campus, thank them for helping send stuff down there to get me out of jail.
Well, when you say your school, do you mean that was a school assigned to you?
Right.
Can you talk about that a little bit? The Friends of SNCC program.
Right. That was, and this was, I think, I give Jim Foreman credit for this. I'm not sure who the guru was who put this all together, but I think Jim Foreman and also some of the people in Atlanta, Julian probably had something to do with this, because he was involved with the press releases, and he and Jack Menace were the ones who were doing the research and stuff. So, but the person that I remember most than talking about it was Jim Foreman, who talked about these campus organizations that were part of our auxiliary organizations, and they were meaningful to us because they helped spread the word. You had to get these press releases out. People stayed up all night trying to get this stuff out to them because it wasn't easy. You had to do telex and typing and mimeographing and all that stuff to get this stuff out. But it worked. So by the time, Bob's reasoning was, look, if we bring these people in, first of all, this story will become international. And it will be something that the rest of the country has to deal with. They may get us, but at least they're going to basically what he said was, nobody cares. They pick us out one by one. They just don't care. It's news for 2 days, but third day they're on something else. He said, but if we get everybody in here one time, something can happen. And this becomes an amazing story, quite honestly, because we end up with about 1,000 white kids in Mississippi. These kids all have to stay in the homes of African Americans. They can't stay in hotels. It's actually too dangerous for them to try to stay in hotels. So they end up in the homes of African Americans. Those kids were going back home at the end of the summer. 6 weeks. They were going back home. These parents, these people who put them up, were going to be living there. And now the cops got their addresses and their phone numbers and their employment, their whatever. So why were these people willing to do that? Because they knew what we all knew, and that is that they live with this danger all the time. And if we didn't do something to open this up, to get some more outside pressure in there, they weren't going to survive. So it turned out to be a phenomenal summer, of course.
Do you believe it succeeded? Did Freedom Summer succeed?
Yeah, I think it did. As a matter of fact, Freedom Summer, out of Freedom Summer, remember what we do in Freedom Summer. The SNCC staff turned this into a voter registration campaign. And it's kind of interesting because, a lot of the people who came in from the North came in to do teaching programs. A lot of them were teachers who were organized to come in and do literacy work and literacy work and civics work, and all of this sort of designed to get people ready for school, because the schools were being integrated, and to get them ready for that. But the SNCC staff, we turned them into organizing campaigns for voter registration. We put together our own voter registration form, and we ran a mock voter registration campaign because we were trying to get names on petitions to submit to the Democratic National Convention to say these people want to vote. They were locked out of Mississippi elections because of the color of their skin. Mississippi had a little provision in the law that said that if you were denied the right to vote, you could actually vote a challenge ballot. So we call this our challenge ballot process. Like our people voted for a different group of delegates to go to this convention, and our delegates should be seated just to keep the regular guys out. So we get to the Democratic Convention.
And this is the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party.
And Fannie Lou Hamer does her famous Sick and Tired speech. And they don't seat us at the convention, but Lyndon Johnson and his people do promise us that they're going to pass the Voting Rights Act. And this is how the Voting Rights Act actually started out at that convention in 1964. And of course, in 1965, the convention is August of 1964. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson introduces the Voting Rights Act. A Voting Rights Act which repeals the poll tax, it repeals the literacy test, and it sends federal registrars into the South. That was the feature that actually revolutionized Mississippi. The federal government sent federal registrars in, and they took our list of people that we had registered in these mock elections and went back and registered them as registered voters in Mississippi. That's what changed the South. That Voting Rights Act was revolutionary in my view, because Mississippi never had any intent of ever letting these people register. Even if they couldn't do a literacy test, they would have come up with something else. They were never going to let these people register to vote, because Marshall County, as I said to you before, was 75% black, and these people were still talking about living on the black rule. In the 1960s, yeah, that's right. These people have been here since they were enslaved, and they try to make a living here. They're working hard. Some of them on property. Many of them have been in college, and you won't even let them register to vote. So now the state, the government, federal government has made up its mind that this is going to be. Lyndon Johnson says this himself. He says to Mississippi, if you don't want us to register these people to vote, you register them. But make no mistake about it, they're going to be registered, even if I have to send federal registrars in to register them to vote. And he was a tough-talking Southerner, that's about all the South really understands is tough talk. So he's not only talked the talk, but he sent those federal registrars in there to register these people to vote. And so by the time I left Mississippi in 1968, there was over 100,000 blacks registered to vote. Blacks were running for office, getting elected to office down there in Mississippi, and made a big difference in the state. But that's primarily was related to the summer of '64.
Do you think the Johnson administration was more of a friend to the movement than the Kennedy administration?
Well, if you look at the facts, I'd have to say yes. I mean, I think Lyndon Johnson was the '65 Voting Rights Act was a revolutionary piece of legislation, and primarily because of that provision. Well, two provisions. One, Mississippi and Georgia too had done this thing. I saw a report. This lady who wrote a book called "One Person, No Vote," and in her book recently, she said, in one section of her book, she says in 1946, I believe it is, right after the World War II, Herman Talmadge in Georgia is telling the state legislature that black people, now that they've been overseas and fought in these wars, they come back home, they think they're going to be citizens with the right to vote. So at that time, Georgia had about 130,000 blacks registered to vote. And so they passed, the state legislature passed the law that says everybody in Georgia has to re-register. Everybody got to re-register. And if your grandfather voted, you don't have to re-register. You grandfathered in. So basically, with this process, they got rid of 130,000 African American voters. At the end of this process, in 2 years, they purged 130,000, only 3,000 blacks registered to vote in the state of Georgia. Now, this is a reaction to World War II. Black people gone over there, giving their lives. One of my people who gave their life over there was my wife's husband, Jimmy D. Wheeler, was a pilot in Tuskegee Air Force. He was bombing a train in Germany, and plane went down, and he died over there. They never recovered his body. They recovered some of his remains, and he's buried in a cemetery in France right today. So this man he was fighting for rights that he never enjoyed here in the United States, and he never could enjoy them because he was. And he is a state governor. He's a governor of, a state. He was a U.S. representative, Herman Talmadge, telling people that they're going to take the right to vote away from these people because they know they're going to be more inspired and more persistent when they come back from World War II. And he wanted to cut them off at the knees before they get any ideas. So everybody knew what the atmosphere was there, and Lyndon Johnson knew this too when he passed his bill. And he knew that if the federal government didn't get in there and act, these state governments were never going to do this because getting these people registered to vote meant that a whole new guard of people would get elected. And you see that today when you go back to these states. I mean, Atlanta's had a black mayor now. There have been generations of black people born in Atlanta who've never been on anything but an African-American mayor. Washington, D.C.'s had one for 40 years. And Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi now is an African-American mayor. And you go, every major city in Mississippi, Greenwood, Greenville, Hattiesburg, all have African-American mayors. And as these people take over these mayor's offices, as was the case with Maynard Jackson in Atlanta and with Marion Barry here in D.C., African-American employment. When Marion Barry was elected mayor of D.C., the police department was 11% black. By the time Barry left office, the police department was 7-8% black in D.C. Now in D.C., a police department is a pretty good paying job. Matter of fact, it was such a good paying job that most of the D.C. cops came from South Carolina. D.C. before D.C. got home rule, it was being run by a congressman named McMillan from South Carolina. McMillan was a redneck, racist congressman from South Carolina, ruled D.C. like it was a plantation. You could apply for a job in the D.C. Police Department in his office in South Carolina, and he would write a letter for you. So you get a little preference coming in here. So most of D.C.'s cops came from down there, and they brought their attitudes up here with them in a city that was 70-some% black. So it was occupied by, and so. And then when I first came to D.C., African Americans did not vote for any positions in this town. When I moved here in 1968, we had to have what they call a free D.C. movement. I go from Mississippi Delta, where we finally can vote now, to Washington, D.C., where people can't vote at all. Yeah, and that wasn't going to last long before John Wilson and myself and Marion Barry and others got busy here and got the right to vote for D.C. In order for us to get the Congress to pass something to take this thing out from under the Congressional Committee, we had to go to South Carolina to this McMillan's congressional district. I took a bus down there with a bunch of people from Washington, D.C. We worked in this man's district, get him voted out of office. He had more black people in the district than he realized. We got all those people organized. We voted him out. Well, I didn't vote him out, but his voters down there voted him out. So, this has been uphill fight for a long time for African Americans, but it has amounted to a great deal of success. And if you look at that last item in our exhibit downstairs here in the museum, I show in there that in 1950 there were 75,000 African Americans enrolled in college. By the time we get to 2008, there's 2.2 million blacks enrolled in college. There's only 250,000 seats in all the black colleges combined. I told people this in Atlanta. I said some of those better colleges are located here in Atlanta. That's why Atlanta should be the leader. Some of those better black colleges are located here. But today we've got 2 million African Americans enrolled in college colleges that they couldn't even have gone to before the Civil Rights Movement. They were barred from these schools. There were riots in these schools to keep these people from enrolling in college in these schools. And so now you've seen a huge increase in the number of African Americans in school. I'm told now that figure's up to almost 2.5 million. I haven't looked at it since 2008, but we're going to look at it now because when we bought the building, we're going to expand our exhibit. I got to bring these things up to date. And I got a Bill Gates scholar who's doing here actually this afternoon. So she's working on this for me. So we're going to update these figures now. But and you'll see the same thing with the increase in income, African American income, go from $8 billion to almost $900 billion in 2008. That year, that figure is greater than the GNP of Canada. That's right. It's a big increase. Okay. And you see the same increase in voter registration. And that's how Obama gets elected president.
Dr. Smith, what do you think the legacy of SNCC is for students today, and what should student activists take away from what you and all your colleagues did back in the movement, and how should we go about organizing today?
Well, I would say that the number one thing that we try to, I end my exhibit here at the museum with the stories, these statistics that I just showed you in the election of President Obama, because I think we have to believe that we can make a difference in order for us to be willing to stay the course and make the sacrifices and do all the things that we have to do to make change in America. We have to believe we can make a difference. And I think the SNCC story, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee story, is the story of that. And it's actually, sometimes when I think about it, it's on the one hand, it's a story that made a tremendous amount of impact in a short period of time, in a matter of 3 or 4 years. And on the other hand, it also has an enduring legacy which continues today in some of the fights that we're still involved in. Like voter suppression is the same thing today as I just described in 1945, talking about Talmadge. I mean, Georgia's still suppressing votes and moving polling places and still trying to find ways to keep African Americans from voting and progressive people, women, from voting. So the issues have, we've made a tremendous amount of progress. The legacy of some of those issues is still around today. And so there's plenty of work to be done out there. The other thing is that the civil rights movement left unresolved this issue of police brutality. Police brutality was around during the days of SNCC. If you think about it for a minute, the Black Panther Party started out as a party. Their fight to carry guns was a fight to carry arms to defend themselves against the police department, the California Police Department in Oakland and other places, against police brutality. And so the Nation of Islam the Fruit of Islam was organized for that same purpose. We didn't do much about police brutality in these cities because we thought that it would be taken care of by people who were working here. And then as time went on, this issue just sort of mushroomed to the point where now we have more African American men in jail than we do in college, which is a tremendous problem. So there are some issues still there that we need to work on, but I think that the message, the lesson that young people should learn from SNCC is that if you choose a cause that is worthy, it has to be grounded in some sense of fairness, some sense of responsibility. In our case, we were talking about rights that should have been guaranteed in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, or certainly in those 3 amendments that passed after the Civil War. Those rights were ours. We earned them on the battlefields. They should have been ours in the first place, and so we were grounded in what I would call legal arguments that should have afforded us those rights. And I think and we were correct about the fact that when most of well-meaning America found out that we were being treated so badly and injured so badly by these things, they were willing to join us to help put the pressure on Congress to pass those amendments. Congress doesn't pass amendments until they get a lot of pressure from the public. To amend the Constitution is very difficult to do. And for Congress to pass those Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act to support those amendments took a lot of support from throughout the country, black and white and Hispanic, straight and gay. And so by the time we come to that to those amendments, we've got a national movement, which I think is significant. But I think that the lesson that I would say that young people should remember is that if you should find your colleagues, find your friends, find your supporters, organize yourself, and stay the course, because you can make a difference here in this country. And let me just say one last thing about that, because since we're talking a lot about Atlanta here, in that last election that took place down there, the Abrams won about 51% of the black and white vote under 50 years of age. She just won. She lost, and what happened there was that age cohort of people had such a low turnout that they weren't effective in terms of the results of the state, because the older you get, the greater the turnout, and so the guy she's running against is getting 70% of 90% of the vote, and he's winning big time over her. And he took a lot of cheating and a lot of other stuff to do it. But if we could ever get that younger generation of people, black and white, to vote on a more regular basis, and to go out there and see this as a real fight, we can change the South. We can flip most of these southern states. We can flip Mississippi and Georgia for sure. Because we've had people running statewide elections that got 47 and 48% of the vote. You get 48% of the vote, you only need 10% of the vote to win. You only need 10%. So why can't they find 10% of, well, one way to get that is to get popular turnout up. So there's some fights out there we can win, and we need to win them because these southern states have a stranglehold on the rest of the country right now. There's so many of them, they team up together, they work together all the time, sort of like the rest of those states in Georgia teamed up against Atlanta. They take all the money from Atlanta for the tax money and spread it out all over the state. They have to do that, and then they treat Atlanta like a stepchild. So there's some fights out there that you guys can help us win, and I'm looking forward to good things. Well, I think Julian Bond is one of those profiles in courage that we don't talk about enough, and but I'm sure his legacy will be fine. He starts out with us as a civil rights worker. Actually, the first time I went to Mississippi, I went with Julian Bond. We were in New Orleans at a conference. I don't think I was chairman of SNCC at the time, but I was on the committee, and we went to New Orleans for a conference together, and then we drove up from New Orleans back through Mississippi, and went through Macomb, Mississippi, stayed at a house that had been firebombed. Actually, he insisted on us sleeping in this lady's basement because so I guess it was a test of will. And then we went on through Jackson and back to Atlanta, back to Morehouse. But he was instrumental with SNCC in terms of the organization. He probably wrote most of the important documents because he was a gifted writer. And I think even then we had learned that people had different skills and different capabilities. And this guy had a gift of writing that was, he could write poetry and songs and all kind of things, and he employed that gift for SNCC, for the civil rights movement, and did a great job for us. And then, of course, he ran for office there in the state, and the state of Georgia probably made a hero out of him when they refused to seat him because he didn't support the Vietnam War. The world will remember that SNCC was probably the only organization that supported Dr. King when Dr. King came out against the Vietnam War. I mean, everybody else abandoned them. SCLC, and not SCLC, but the NAACP and the Urban League and all of the famous leaders came out. One of them even said they thought he had lost his mind or something. But SNCC stood with him because we believed that people shouldn't be out there getting killed over issues that at the time when they didn't have their own rights here in the United States. First of all, and Dr. King was probably right that in order for us to remedy some of these needs that had to be taken care of in the black community, the United States had to get out of that war. We were just spending too much money over there and so we were with him all right on, but Julian was because he took a principal position, he was punished, and in the punishment is often the case. In the effort to try to punish him, they catapulted him into national prominence as a young, articulate, up-and-coming politician, and of course later on he gets nominated. I think the first African-American male to be nominated on a major ticket to run for president, as vice president. I'm sorry, on the ticket here. So he's got his own legacy. He's got his own, and he's got a young son, Michael Julian, down in Atlanta, who's following in his footsteps on the city council. I spent a half a day with him when I was there a few days ago, and he sounds like his dad. He looks like his dad a little bit. And he's got the fire in the belly, so his legacy will be fine. And I think he's at, and then of course he had a teaching career that spanned I don't know how many years, and there is no better place for somebody with his background than to be able to spend his golden years in a classroom with young people who are challenging his intellect, and he's also teaching them things that they probably wouldn't learn otherwise. So he's had a good life, a good legacy, and I'm sure heaven was smiling when they finally got him up there.